Started. Good afternoon, and thank you for attending today's webinar on healthcare cloud strategies when security is a moving target. My name is Dan Chicoine with FNTS, and I'll be your host for today. A couple housekeeping items before we begin. If you should have any questions during the session, please feel free to enter them in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll save some time at the end of the session for Q&A. Additionally, you'll notice there's a handout available as well that highlights the FNTS Healthcare Cloud offering available to download. That's in the handout section on the right hand side as well. So now I'd like to introduce you to today's panel members. First up is Chad Brooks. Chad is the U.S. Healthcare and Life Sciences Strategy Lead for Microsoft's One Commercial Partner team. He has been with the company for over 20 years and has spent the majority of his time working with partners in the healthcare space as both an architect and developer. His experience has been working with Microsoft partners across the health spectrum, from electronic health record vendors, hospital systems, payer organizations, pharmaceuticals, and the life science industry. Today, Chad is accountable for driving the capacity and capability growth of partners on Microsoft's cloud properties. So welcome, Chad. Next up, as FNTS's Field Chief Technology Officer, Chris Williamson assists in developing strategic partnerships and long-term digital transformation initiatives with clients. Chris has extensive knowledge of service offerings and partner-driven solutions to provide organizations with a deep understanding of FNTS's capabilities and technical solutions to meet overall growth strategies. Chris also leads the development of next-generation capabilities and services that simplify IT operations, enhance cost savings, modernize applications, and ultimately shorten delivery times. Chris has more than 25 years of experience with leading IT infrastructure, application development, and service delivery teams in business environments, ranging from startups to Fortune 500 companies. So welcome, Chris. And finally, today we have Robert Lamanga-Ryder, is a strategic, versatile, and innovative information technology, security, and risk management leader, providing hands-on and visionary leadership. As VP and Chief Information Security Officer for FNTS, Robert executes highly successful information security programs and leads information security strategies and maturity for FNTS, encompassing risk management, strategy, architect and engineering, cloud, regulatory compliance, IT governance, and privacy. Leveraging more than 16 years of expertise, Robert is also a strategic advisor, consulting with customers and partnering to achieve security initiatives. Robert helps others understand the value and risk alignment to their enterprise through proper security strategy. So welcome, Rob, and welcome to all of our panel members. So, Chad, why don't you go ahead and kick us off and tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in the industry today, specific to healthcare and IT trends.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to this audience. So, as we look at healthcare, right, there's two sets of kind of discrete but interrelated forces that are kind of driving change in healthcare. The first, I think, is what we've all experienced and are continuing to experience with COVID-19. Particularly on the patient-facing side of healthcare, healthcare organizations are really being squeezed by the pandemic. In Q2, where we kind of faced probably the most acute aspect, and here in the United States, and I think we're seeing in India right now, something very similar to what we experienced. Over 70% of elective procedures were being canceled. And unfortunately, those were the most profitable and most bottom line contributions to these hospitals, right? They're already working on very tight margins, really subsidizing certain aspects of their business through these elective procedures. And when those go away, it's a big challenge, right? And I think this drove, certain levels of anticipation to go and and lay off certain sets of workers in the healthcare industry. But at the same time, healthcare was getting squeezed by shortages of protection equipment, ventilators. We saw a mad scramble across a lot of different things, right? And the fact that, I think hospitals have, a lot of hospitals have really looked towards partnering either in a kind of a larger ecosystem or even potentially M&A to just be able to go and survive. So, right now, we're seeing a shift from, just managing this crisis to kind of moving forward, right? How do we deal with future events that might affect healthcare in the same way, and trying to get us back into kind of a much better future and positioning things. So that's the first step. But there's also, if we kind of wind the clock back just a bit and look at the types of things that were happening pre-pandemic that still exist, there's a number of different factors that are kind of driving change. First and foremost is all of our expectations as consumers of healthcare. The patients have a much higher degree of expectation as far as the types of services that provider organizations can give to them. One, I think, in a survey that I saw, over 80% of patients just expect their provider to have access to their full electronic medical record, to understand the history and what they've done. Having healthcare at our fingertips in much the same way that, we can have access to our bills or bank accounts or even ordering food online. Those expectations are really through the roof. And these are scary things, right? As we look at, the amount of data that is generated in healthcare, it is kind of an ever increasing pace, both from the types of devices that are on the front end that are recording data, all the way to being able to do things like, automated transcriptions for physicians. And everybody has access to more and more of this. And so we're just seeing a compounding set of data, I think, on the front end. And how do we secure those things, right? How do we secure the endpoints of all of the various systems that patients might interact with or other care providers? We saw a number in 2020 that there was about $6.5 billion worth of loss based from data breaches in healthcare alone. That's a worldwide number, but it's still a fairly staggering set of exposure when it comes to that. So, as healthcare organizations look to do this digital transformation and to start to provide more electronic services for their patients, their employees, and even the clinicians themselves, keeping security first and foremost in the mind is critical. Some of the other things that we think about too are, aging populations, right? While this is not necessarily something that impacts patient expectations, the fact that we have more people who require more complex care and fewer workers to go and staff those things means that we need to look for alternate means to be able to service a lot of these capabilities. And I think more and more, all these forces are kind of coming together to increase expectations for the types of IT services that can be fulfilled, really in the provider and across the healthcare space in general. And again, with the pandemic and these decreasing margins, we start to think about, hey, where are ways that we can start to outsource some of these capabilities, right? How can we keep some of our workers from necessarily having to go into and take care physically of the machines that are operating our business. How do we deal with certain things such as you managing those environments and keeping them secure across potentially a lot of different locations on the back end. So I think that it really there's a number of forces kind of conspiring to drive IT organizations to look outside of the way they traditionally serviced and provided services for again all those employees, clinicians, and even patients. So we started to look at things like cloud, look at the people who have just incredible economies of scale and are able to go and provide those services at kind of a lower, total cost of ownership, lower fees, drive things more towards an expense category instead of a capital outlay. So, Chris, if we've decided to start to move things to the cloud, certain workloads that we've got, what are some things that we should consider?
Sure. Thanks, Chad. Yeah, it's in kind of evaluating how to move your workloads to the cloud. We tried to kind of come up with a checklist here of some of the best practices that our team looks at when we're helping clients evaluate what can move to cloud and what's the best architecture for them. First and foremost, kind of like any important business initiative, is really kind of building the business case and making sure that that's solid, that there's support within the business for the change, and then just really kind of broadly communicating that change, because any kind of significant initiative is going to take a lot of organizations. Certainly, teams this year learned how to pivot quickly and work agilely under all conditions. But kind of communicating that business case, including all the cost benefit, and particularly the security and compliance advantages that you're going to get out of that transition, is really important. And it also really ends up accelerating the effort to make that transition as well. So business case is kind of foundational. Secondarily is really around the current state of your operations. This is really a key factor, having clear sight lines to the current state of your technology and operations. What do you have? What state is it in? What is it running? For example, healthcare folks that we work with have systems that are really a broad range of things, like EMRs, EHRs, portals, telehealth. It's a litany of platforms, and each of those platforms have a variety of integrations of one facet or another. And in kind of assessing those things and understanding that architecture is really important. You have to account for that as you're starting to plan your move and what that's going to look like, right? So having that inventory, understanding the processes and the data flow that are related to that, really kind of underlines coming out with a good outcome as far as a cloud migration goes. Next, is really around compliance and security. Near to every healthcare organization, is kind of keeping those compliance and security requirements, rock solid, to keep those front of mind and making sure that they're going to be satisfied, as part of this transition. One of the advantages of working with a provider like FNTS, for instance, is that we've built a tailored healthcare environment, and kind of on the advice of our customers, that really was advantageous to them in taking care of most of those compliance and security requirements over time, taking that off our customers' plate, and then really just consistently working to address whatever the next challenge is, what the security challenges are. And Rob will certainly talk to that in detail, but and those compliance requirements, as they continue to evolve, having somebody kind of going to bat for you and looking at that day in and day out is really an advantage. So that's one important factor of how to handle that. Next is really kind of around the sizing, the architecture. Obviously, anytime you're trying to migrate cloud platforms, we're looking at what is that shape is that going to take in its future state architecture. So one of our team's key skills is really doing that sizing and architecting of those workloads, what they're going to look like in the cloud, how they're going to perform, and then once you've identified kind of what workloads make the most sense to move to what cloud, our team kind of projects what that's going to look like from a cost and configuration standpoint. So you've got that visibility of the future state, before the migration even begins. And that's really imperative to help reinforce that business case and make sure that you're achieving the value out of that initiative, as you defined it. And then also, workload performance can really become a wild card that changes the math around your cloud operations and your cloud costs, in your future state. So it's really imperative to make sure you're getting the price performance from the cloud that you've selected, as part of that migration assessment piece. And then one last key factor is really kind of around organizational resource availability. Making sure that your team has the bandwidth to take on a migration. Certainly there's a lot of activity in preparation and during that transition. Folks like ourselves at FNTS really pick up a lot of the transition resource needs. But many of the healthcare IT teams we work with are super thin and overloaded. So kind of carefully assessing the roles, responsibilities during that transition is really important. It also helps project what the roles and responsibilities are going to be once you reach steady state. So once you cross over into your future state model, you decommission your current state model. What kind of training, what kind of staffing you're going to do to kind of get yourself optimized in your steady state is really important. So that's just kind of a brief summary of some of the practices that we see, as folks are really looking to migrate workloads to cloud.
So now we've realized the cloud's kind of where we want to move to. Talk a little bit about, we hear a lot about hybrid and multi-cloud, and what is kind of the value props and difference between those for the audience?
Yeah, just to kind of start off, I think what we've seen is kind of an evolution, in the cloud ecosystem, at the outset, from folks moving things kind of wholesale to public cloud, to a model where folks are really trying to find the right platform or the right cloud environment, and be able to interoperate across those cloud environments. So it's finding kind of the correct cost performance factor, and really just trying to find the right architecture that makes sense for your business and your operations, that drives out cost, creates the agility you're looking for. And our clients, have really kind of found, working with a partner like us that's kind of actively day in and day out, looking for vulnerabilities, looking for the impact of the next big compliance requirement, is really a big advantage, and it lets their teams turn their attention and really focus on delivering things like better patient experience and whatever, and adapt to whatever the next pivot down the road is going to be.
Yeah, and I'll say that, moving things into the cloud is based on an element of trust, right? And trust doesn't happen literally overnight. It's something that develops over usually a long period of time. In fact, I would use an example that back in the early days of electricity, when it wasn't the most reliable thing in the world, you can look at the hotels. In New York, there's still many examples of this, where there's a generator from back in the early 1900s in their basement, where they had to provide consistent levels of light and electricity in there. And we still even see backups and things like that are on-prem for kind of servicing critical workloads. But today, when we hit the light switch and the light doesn't come on, we don't assume the electrical grid is out. We assume that the light bulb is burned out, right? And that trust took the population a very long time to go and figure out. And I think cloud is in the same way. And if we liken this to healthcare, there are certain critical workloads that we're not quite ready to let go of, and being on-prem, and trust things like internet connections and the reliability of these things to service those critical workloads. And I'll take a great example, electronic health record, right? EHR system. I'm seeing a lot of customers out there that are using things like Epic today, right? Where they have an environment that is running on-prem. They're not quite ready to move this to the cloud. So they're looking at things like their disaster recovery environment. And part of that is you also need to target in when you're moving things to the cloud are the things that are going to provide you the most value. Disaster recovery environments, high availability environments are often very expensive to go and maintain. And a very good first opportunity for that oftentimes is taking this on in the cloud, right? You have the ability to kind of expand at will a good bit more in the cloud. So we're seeing Epic customers go and turn these things on in Microsoft's cloud. And allow it to basically spend down at a very low cost from a maintenance standpoint, and then when it's as needed, expand and take over those workloads. And so, again, I would say identify those high value targets, right? What are the things that are going to ease either your workload, which is tightly coupled with your cost matrix, right? So, leveraging those things are going to be the key first steps.
Say, Chad, what are you seeing? Is it sometimes a mix of environments? So like a private cloud with the public cloud? What are we seeing from a healthcare perspective as far as best practices go with that?
Absolutely. And, as I mentioned, there are certain workloads that either aren't ready because there's, a potential issue of trust. I think there's certain things that just make sense. And just in general, when you have a medical imaging device, you're not going to go and have, that amount of data that's going to be, streaming back and forth to the cloud at the same kind of response rates. So, there's always going to remain this need to have data very near the point of care or the point of data capture. But there's opportunities as we look at that, right? As we're capturing, potentially gigabytes or even terabytes of medical image information, they become less valuable over time, right? All the clinicians have taken a look at this data. There's opportunities to move this into really low cost storage media sitting in the cloud that doesn't have the same access rates. So storage is very much a place where you can immediately start to take advantage of, cloud scale, and the economies of scale that cloud can give you. And again, those DR environments, an excellent first place to, I think that we're seeing customers explore, particularly things like critical systems like EHRs. And I've actually seen, even beyond that, I've actually seen some mid-sized type of providers decide to go with a fully cloud-based electronic medical record. It services their needs very well and aligns very much to kind of how they're consuming it.
Yeah, Chad, just to add to that too, I think most of the healthcare CIOs and IT leaders that I'm working with don't feel like they're going to have a ton of capital additional this year in their budget. And so they're really kind of targeting areas like, refreshing their DR backup infrastructure as a place where they can, repurpose capital, move to an OpEx model through cloud services, and really repurpose that capital into transformation, modernization, or better customer experience. So that's really kind of the strategy that a lot of them have taken to try and really, put their dollars where they're going to do the most good.
All right. Well, so now, I'm in the cloud. Rob, tell me, how do I, ensure a secure environment in the cloud? So talk to us more on that security flavor of what you're seeing in the cloud environment specific to healthcare.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Everything that has been said before is spot on. And I will provide the caveat that we're going to partner with you to help make sure you have what's necessary to feel secure, know how to be secure before we go in the cloud. Because once we're in the cloud, which a lot of organizations have found themselves in, and how do I apply my controls and processes, it becomes reactionary versus proactive and in line, and that's the goal of operating securely in a cloud environment. Healthcare organizations we've seen are increasingly looking at both industry-specific clouds and managed services providers to reduce the time to value and the enablement from everything from secure data protection and ease of adherence on compliance issues, so namely HIPAA and high-tech. So there's a lot of these issues and concerns that an industry-specific cloud solution can address and make it easy so they don't have to build it from the ground up. As mentioned here, instead of making capital investments for hardware, cloud provides a continued refresh, ongoing maintenance, upkeep of technology, so near latest and greatest, in addition to the security solutions, capabilities, and the staffs that are staying on top of changes to regulation. So let's talk about some of the common mistakes and challenges that folks are faced with. And these are the areas that folks like FNTS and our healthcare cloud offerings in partnership with Microsoft, we can help you avoid some of the common mistakes. And number one, off the bat, is not defining or understanding what that strategy looks like to maintain 100% visibility and control of your data, applications, assets, and services. So we've talked about fantastic places to start and how to formulate a strategy and plan. Let's do it right so that security is baked into your solution, so we're not bolting on pieces that don't automatically integrate. We're talking about not understanding what either the retraining, realigning team skill sets, or understanding where they need a managed service provider. And then looking at sprawl and inconsistent naming conventions, right? Complexity can kill the cloud, and working with a managed service provider can help you avoid some of those pitfalls. So staying ahead in current regulatory changes takes a lot of time and effort, even for those in the industry. And compliance requirements, we have to make sure they're uniformly applied across the technology footprint. So when you're talking hybrid cloud, public cloud, looking at a healthcare-focused solution helps simplify and normalize the outputs that your organization has to deal with, one single set of capabilities to apply consistently across that data, application, assets, and services. Namely, the protection of your electronic protected health information, covering all of the administrative, technical, and physical safeguards, and delivering folks the self-auditing capabilities and advanced analytics. Within organizations, you also see a blend of roles which are putting pressure on teams. So think of this notion of your compliance, privacy, and security professional, folks that are wearing multiple hats. And with the limited cycles and resources that healthcare firms are experiencing, that we've talked in-depthly about, the challenge to make sure that you're being proactive and can chart a path forward that's in alignment with that business agility, depending on which systems are being moved, is critical. And that's where a managed service provider can step in. In addition, when selecting a cloud services provider, thinking about security, organizations want to know that those partnerships are rock solid, and that can lead to real-time visibility and taking a consultative approach. And on another note, how do you stay ahead of the ongoing regulatory changes unless you're signed up and receiving notices from the Department of Health and Human Services, or signed up for HIPAA or high trust or high tech group? You may not know things that are changing, right? That's where a managed service provider can come into play to help be your partner. Things such as the safe harbor law updates that were passed earlier this year in the law that are now incentivizing organizations to adopt preventive cybersecurity measures that could reduce fines or shorten audits in the event that there's a security incident or a breach. Things like the HIPAA safe harbor law, we've seen the first, the first drafts of them come out, and we're going to ongoing see incentivizing legislation that'll have positive impacts for the entire healthcare sector to take a more proactive approach to HIPAA and high-tech compliance in alignment with industry standards.
Yeah, and I'll underscore a couple of things here. Microsoft has realized in our clouds that these compliance requirements are very much geared towards securing environments, right? These things exist fundamentally to protect the information that we're trying to protect. So all of these policies and procedures, there's a reason for it. And so, we take security absolutely critical part of what Microsoft does and part of our DNA. And so we've actually adopted, compliance frameworks into our common engineering criteria. And I'll take as an example that as a new service in one of our clouds gets released, we actually have a schedule, which is it's approximately 6 weeks after a new service is launched, to have it kind of fall under our kind of regulatory set of requirements from a compliance standpoint. Following our guidelines and procedures for signing a HIPAA business associate agreement, for example, is something that every new service on the Azure platform goes through, and is actually part of Microsoft's standard contract that we sign with all of our customers, the standard cloud agreement, customer cloud agreement. The BAA is part of that. But it more importantly is actually what we're doing under the covers. So again, when we start thinking about economies of scale, we have teams of people that are looking at, the impact that being compliant in these ways, and it goes beyond just HIPAA compliance. It goes to Part 11 compliance from a life sciences standpoint, or any number of other things, is taking advantage of those economies of scale. Let's rely on the people that understand underneath the covers what is actually needed to take care of. So you can assume that you can focus your procedures for securing this information on the areas that you control, right? And underneath that, we'll go so far as we actually go through a high-tech audit, a high-trust audit. And we'll actually provide that for organizations to be able to go and inherit if that's something that you want to go and do your own audit from a high-trust perspective. So, it is possible to achieve all the compliance that you need in these cloud environments, assuming that you have that kind of right infrastructure in place and are making the right bets, I think, on the folks that can take care of it.
All great points. Thanks, Chad. And to his point, the whole notion of business associate agreements and making sure the end-to-end contract and service delivery mechanisms are all meeting the same requirements. That's the value of these types of industry-specific solutions, that is all of the pieces in the puzzle, right? From the cloud provider and our partners such as Microsoft and FNTS signing the BAAs and having that common control framework that's meeting everything from HIPAA, high trust, your SOC 2 issuance, all of those common frameworks that other organizations have based some of their control structures on. And a lot of things, it comes down to the time and focus of each organization's information security program. And as we know, the time and resources on those can vary. In private cloud environments, we know there's more control and focus on traditional program elements, whereas public clouds, the efforts can shift towards ensuring cloud provider due diligence, meeting SLAs and contractual and regulatory compliance. And when you mix in the hybrid cloud architectures and the consumption of SaaS, PaaS, coupled with your security outcomes, your control frameworks, you begin to shift your thinking to, again, focusing on data, applications, assets, and services, but mapping it back to the who, what, when, why, and how of how those are communicating. And then we can easily work and partner with folks to educate and enable the controls that protect that data in flight, because we don't want to apply security operations and DevSecOps and mechanisms that are going to slow the business down. We want to bake it into the processes so the outputs are in real time or near real time, while enabling that same level of visibility, threat hunting, and security outcomes that are allowing organizations to track incidents, respond to threats, or partner with managed service providers to offload that from them. All of that makes it more palatable to craft controls and policies that enable that digital transformation and cloud shift, because we want the protections to be right-sized where the data resides and follow the data. And that key right there being how we're going to maintain that visibility and control of each environment, regardless of where it's at. And that causes programs to focus on how to blend the native capabilities or use a platform approach to normalize those outputs and transform automations or transform operations on the road to automation and orchestration, which is where the economies of scale of a mature cloud operation come into be. So a couple of things to keep in mind when you're talking about your cloud security strategy on public, private, and hybrid is that it aligns with your existing program and supports your business strategy. You're not having to create this from the ground up and net new. You're applying that current information security risk management program and considerations and vendor due diligence, but taking into account that shared responsibility model, your roles and responsibilities matrix, and thinking about applying the principles of zero trust. I know that folks have heard that term used and abused, and sometimes in a product shape, but organizations like FNTS and Microsoft take the term zero trust to heart by truly focusing on what needs to occur and function within the service delivery structure to limit any of the negative exposure to our customers and help level them up to a level of capabilities that you can only realize when working with industry-specific clouds and partners. And we also want to think about and ensure that our standards are set. Again, customization kills the cloud. Same thing with security. Consistent control and enforcement across all of these data points, whether they're endpoints, your on-prem infrastructure or cloud. Having a common denominator helps you simplify that response and delivers an efficient and solid program that is meeting or exceeding your compliance requirements. The last thing I want to touch on is how healthcare focused offerings can differ from standard clouds, right? There's a lot of interpretation differences on what an industry cloud or a healthcare cloud might mean. And at the end of the day, it's a secure and proven and capable infrastructure and managed services and outputs supporting that specific regulated industry. So think tailored to the minimum expectations, but still aligned with where that provider's expertise resides across all of the regulatory and compliance spectrums that they meet for the cloud services at scale. When cloud service providers offer to shrink that gap or simplify the ability to operate in a secure and compliant manner, think about that time to value that shrinks considerably for the healthcare organizations. The opportunity cost of not leveraging those native capabilities in the business has greater incentives to move towards healthcare focused cloud. Think simplification, consolidation, agility, and more importantly, a ready to use solution that you can see the end goal and work with a partner to build and strategize a plan to achieve that. Lastly, there's always going to be analysis and requirements specific to each organization. But when you're looking at a near turnkey operation to consume and adapt your business's process to, it's a win-win because you're eliminating customization on your end. It's significant because it represents a paradigm shift within cloud services themselves. It really is that next iteration. Who enjoys continuously issuing RFPs when each time a specific capability is up for renewal, right? You talk about fragmenting on the skill sets, fragmenting security capabilities and visibility, when you can just enable built-in capabilities that deliver that instant time to value without the added complexity. The future of the healthcare industry will be reimagined through more business capabilities, customer self-service tools, and that redundancy, resiliency, and protection to improve your operational efficiencies. The outcomes and patient satisfaction are going to drive this migration towards healthcare-focused cloud. So without saying security is not going to be the only advantage, it's just one of many.
Great insights there. So Chris, you're out there talking to clients on a day-to-day basis in the healthcare industry. What are some of those, from a security perspective, challenges that kind of keep them up at night? Is it staffing, monetary, things like that?
Yeah, it's really kind of, all of the above, I think would probably be the best category. I think one of the challenges I see with a lot of folks in the healthcare IT space is just the ability to kind of keep up with, the security challenges and the compliance challenges, they're continuing to try and get behind in keeping things up to date and addressing, the next thing. And it's been hard for them to be on the proactive side of, the ledger as opposed to the reactive side of the ledger. And I think that's the biggest thing that's kind of been keeping most of this healthcare IT leaders up that I talk to. Is just that they feel like they're continually getting behind, and they don't have the ability to continue to scale their team to continue to meet these things as they come. So that's where the appeal has come for a managed healthcare centric environment where you're tapping that expertise and you're leveraging that that resource model to deliver that security and address all the different facets there, as well as keeping an eye down the road for the next compliance impact is going to change how you operate. So that ability to kind of keep track really is kind of the first thing on the list.
That's this concept of IT sprawl, right? We used to think of it in terms of like the number of servers or things like that, but it's really it's now the number of services. And again, going back to all the things that this group has been talking about, there are a lot of things that are coming to market that should be taken advantage of. And how do you manage that cohesively? How do you think of it in terms of it's coming under my umbrella, and ultimately I am responsible as an IT organization. I'm responsible for ensuring the security, the consistency of the data, who has access to it, what things are being done with it, where is the data flowing, at the same time trying to accommodate new sets of capabilities. So the better, that's what keeps IT folks up at night as you're starting to think about these things. But the advantage of the cloud is that it becomes easier to go and do this, right? You have a platform base that you can then really you can expand very easily. You're not going to be limited by traditional physical constraints or capital outlays in the same way. Not only more closely aligning to kind of your own operating costs across all facets, right? Not just of what am I consuming of the service, but the overhead of managing security, the overhead of managing access to these sets of capabilities. It's a very scary thing, and I think it's traditionally I think healthcare has been a laggard as well from a technology adoption, because those are the things that keep us up at night, right? And the good news is it's becoming easier and easier to adopt new services and new sets of capabilities in kind of this new paradigm shift of moving assets into cloud environments.
Ahead there too is the ease and simplicity of the native integration of these cloud services. Because right now there are, as you mentioned, gigabytes, terabytes, petabytes of data, and to try to stitch that together oneself while managing your operations and your engineering and your architecture, and then to get operational outputs that are meaningful, it can take quite the bit of time, investment, and dedicated focus, and the ability to enable features that are already built in and present on a healthcare-focused cloud to provide the level of visibility and capabilities that you desire, aligned with your expertise. The value there is almost incalculable, right? I mean, the shift in how your operations team can focus in the cycles, it can transform, adjust, and free up. The weight being lifted off of those traditional teams is really an intangible benefit that I think doesn't go into a lot of the traditional calculations of the cloud migration, but it becomes more and more apparent the more services that are being consumed within that platform.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think last year was a great example where, healthcare IT professionals did all kinds of heroic things to kind of stand up technologies and operate under, agility under duress. But talking on the ground, this year it's been a challenge for them to kind of go back and look at those solutions, make sure they were architected correctly. In a lot of cases they weren't, and validate that they were deployed securely, which in a lot of cases they weren't. So and the organization and the initiatives already kind of moved on now. There's no time to go back and revisit those things, so they kind of are what they are. So the opportunity to have, as you say, Chad, a platform that you can lean on to ensure those things, really gets valuable over time, particularly as the pace of change just continues to ratchet up.
All right, well, very good insights there, guys. So, just kind of in summary here today, we hope some of the themes that we were able to spotlight was some of the trends that we're seeing out there specific to healthcare and technology, some of the best practices as far as migrating to the cloud, and a great little checklist there that Chris has as well. And then, what is that right mix of one size fits all with the whole hybrid versus multi-cloud specific to healthcare. And then finally, best practices from a security posture for the industry. So great conversation here. One thing, we wanted to also call out or tease out is here at FNTS, we do offer a free cloud migration assessment. So if that's something you guys are interested in after the webinar, feel free to contact any of the three panelists here, or our general information is down there on the bottom of the screen as well. And we'd love to take some time now to answer some questions. So let me pull those up here. We've got a few. The first one is, and feel free anybody to kind of jump in on these. We are a large operation. Are there smaller companies that are also using Azure and finding it cost effective?
Yeah, I guess sorry.
Oh.
I'll just say that, I think most of the folks that we work with are kind of in the mid-market space and upper mid-market space, and even the small organizations are finding a lot of value in trying to just really optimize where their teams are focused and how they're delivering value for their organization. And I think, that's kind of where, there's been, concerted interest in trying to get to a cloud model to really kind of take advantage of that. And of course, you have to do your homework, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for smaller mid-market firms to really jump on that, particularly as the maturity now from a multi-cloud standpoint has really, evolved, to a great point at this point.
The cloud has actually been faster in that space than anywhere else. They have fewer resources. They're more aware of the problems that potentially face them from an IT perspective than the really small organizations, right? Who might not have the personnel, the staff to really get their arms around the true problem space. So couple that with the fact that they tend to be a little more agile than the very largest of organizations. And I think that personally, I've seen the biggest growth in kind of that medium-sized organization. The large organizations wants to get there, but there's more institutional momentum behind the things that they've got, the investments that they've got. And so it's more of a phased, more calculated approach on the larger size. And on the smaller size, while super nimble, just might not aware that server in the closet is a big risk for them, right? And so, you don't see quite as much adoption, but more willingness to move towards things like, SaaS type offerings, right? So.
Our attendees, you can add a question in the chat box up on the right-hand side of the screen. Next question. What type of workloads might healthcare organizations put in the private cloud over the public cloud, or vice versa? Do you see, is there a trend of one certain type of workload over the other?
I guess I would say that, organizations really have to kind of take a holistic look at their operating environment and their platforms. And kind of as I was talking to in our checklist earlier, really kind of understand the dynamics of those workloads. Certainly it runs, a wide range now from, folks that are operating on, IBM Z or I platforms, moving those to a managed cloud model, to taking, things direct to Microsoft Azure. So it's been a really kind of a compound approach of finding the right platform and kind of looking at what your specific makeup is, and then finding the right design that delivers value for your organization.
In there why you might want a private cloud versus public. Public is really geared towards the lowest common denominator, right? And I think the features and functionality of public cloud are always expanding, right? But there are certain workloads that just aren't going to be good fits in a public cloud. Either there's concern about potentially some shared resource impact, or a particular technology that today just isn't suited for that. For instance, I think FNTS has a couple of offerings of things that just aren't available in public clouds today. So, there's certain, mainframe type of workload, certain, processor types, things like that do have, special requirements today. Even things like bare metal implementations, right? Where you are the only, you're the sole occupant of a piece of physical hardware. Those types of things, while available in public clouds, tend to be the most expensive options that you can go after, and typically really are steered towards very high-end type of implementation. So there's a range of reasons why you might go to public cloud. And again, back to what Chris was saying, I think you have to look at what those workloads are and see which is the most appropriate. It's important to have that choice, though, and not assume that you'll be able to move everything to public, or move everything to private, quite frankly, because there's ways in the public cloud that you can really drive those costs down pretty significantly.
To wedge in the middle, I've seen some of the organizations that have either more strict or defined data classification policies, and thus risk acceptance requirements that will shift the focus of the conversation one way or another. And it comes down to that risk appetite and tolerance that it can span organization size, and it can span applications depending on what they're processing and how comfortable they are. And so that does play a factor, layering into the operational, the FOA impact, the cost impact, and so forth.
Great. This next question is specific for Rob or Chad. Rob or Chad, are you seeing any new trends or patterns regarding cyber attacks, ransomware, etc., targeted specifically in the healthcare space? Who wants to tackle that one?
That's an interesting one. I'll start it. You can fill in the blanks here. Quite frankly, I think a lot of ransomware associated attacks in healthcare tend to be underreported. Let's put it that way, for a number of reasons. A lot of times, there's not a lot. First off, there's not a lot of money in healthcare, despite what everybody else thinks. It's a big space, but the organizations that are the front lines typically, don't have a lot of free cash flow and aren't big targets, I think, for ransomware or cyber attacks. It doesn't mean that the exposure isn't there and these things can't come up. I just don't know. The places where we are seeing those are in really the payer side. Where you do have kind of a large concentration of money and potential surface area, because they're dealing with very large populations of patients and the data that's attached to it. So, I don't know that the healthcare industry is being specifically targeted, but as you move down kind of that food chain onto the payer side, I do see a little bit more because, again, there's a lot of exposure, I think, from a regulatory perspective when you potentially have millions of lives of data sitting, kind of in your institution. And so, they do paint a big surface, and the bigger surface you have, the more vulnerable ultimately you are to a wide range of types of attacks. But I don't know. I haven't seen anything specific from an industry perspective.
Attacks that I'll talk about, like Chad said, aren't targeted only at healthcare or heightened at healthcare, but the exposure is much greater, especially due to some of the pandemic challenges. And I'll start off by saying the social engineering attacks and phishing attacks have thrived more than ever. And what has been a gift to the social engineers and the malicious actors has been the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, think about the concerns that folks have, the terms that folks are Googling, the outreach on symptoms and level of care and what they should do. Social engineering has thrived more than ever. So targeted attacks at organizations and patients and payers, coupled with the increase in virtual meetings and virtual sharing platforms with regulated data. You couple that with, we've seen on the healthcare supply chain, right? Attacks on that, on intellectual property. So think some of the vaccine data that has been speculated to have been stolen by some malicious actors, even from manufacturing facilities. So you've seen, I think, a lot of this, some different flavors of the same types of attacks that have just become more targeted, more amplified. And then something that's affected a lot of industries, maybe not as much as healthcare, because of the fact that a lot of workers have been going actually on the front lines, but home networks and mixing personal and work environments, blurring those data repositories, it creates the perfect storm of data sprawl at home on unsecured networks. If a healthcare provider is working from home or trying to get into a network that was hastily deployed for remote access. I have also seen that newly discovered vulnerabilities, they're being weaponized extremely quick. So think about, we've all heard about zero-day vulnerability, something that is exploited and a system is compromised when it's published. We're talking about end-day vulnerabilities that is being exploited before the notifications get out there, whether it's from advanced persistent threats or nation states, or just the underground groups that are actively exploiting organizations. Think your Internet of Things devices, your mobile medical devices that may have not been hardened to the current threat landscape. I've seen a lot of attackers trying to take advantages of those, but I'll end by saying too that the shift to cloud, if not done correctly and through a partner and with trusted services, has also led to those cloud APIs, which makes it so easy to consume cloud services. Those are becoming a preferred method of attack for a lot of entities, and specifically against healthcare organizations, because APIs are easy to discover, they're easy to manipulate, they're easy to obfuscate. And if you don't have the right knowledge or partner working with you to make sure that you're integrating and consuming services in the right manner, you can easily leak data and not have any information or clue about it. So that's what I'm seeing from a trend perspective. And it's just amplified on healthcare because of a lot of the pandemic concerns.
All right. Well, we're at the top of the hour. So again, I just wanted to thank our panelists, Chad, Chris, and Rob. Very, very informative session today. For our attendees, just a heads up, you'll be receiving an email from us in the next few days with a link to the recording of today's webinar as well. And of course, if you ever have any questions or inquiries on how FNTS or Microsoft can be helping your guys' IT environments, feel free to give us a call. And with that, I'll wish everyone a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.